The aim of this thesis is to analyze the figure of the interpreter with all its nuances, starting from the concept of interpreter in general, and then analyzing specifically the interpreters for the deaf. In order to understand well the concept of interpreter that we have in the modern world, we must start from its beginning, analyzing its history to see how it developed over the centuries and how it became recognized as a profession. In ancient times, interpreters were mainly employed in military or trade settings, and the art of interpreting wasn't seen as a real job, but more like an innate ability that the upper classes demanded without making any differences to soldiers, pen pushers, or slaves. Interpreters were mediators, and they were needed because they knew two or more languages in their respective culture. The interpreters used a way of translating that is today known as negotiation interpreting, or whispering at the ear of the listener, technique that today we call chuchotage. The most ancient testimony of interpreting goes back to 3000 before Christ, and it is represented by an incision on the rock tombs of the princes of Elephantine. Pharaohs needed dragomans, interpreters for Aramaic, to communicate with near regions, and so the princes of Elephantine, who knew the language and the culture of the bordering countries, were nominated the superintendents of the dragomans. In 1964, when the RIT was created, Registry for the Interpreters of Deaf, the United States recognized the interpretation and sign language as a profession. Before the creation of the RID, people who carried out the role of mediator between the deaf and the hearing were volunteers who knew the sign language and the world of deaf, like hearing children of deaf parents. The first way of interpretation was paternalistic. Studies confirmed that where there is a group of deaf people, signs are formed, initially simple and then more and more complex, until bringing to life a genuine language that, like all other languages, is influenced by the historic and social context in which it took life, as well as from the verbal language from the country. In Italy, since 1980, thanks to linguistic researchers, it was demonstrated that the visual gestural communication used by Italian deaf people is a real language, and it has all the characteristics to be called this way. Recognizing to the used signs the status of language means that there is the necessity not to only know the language to translate it, but overall to respect the thought and the autonomy of the deaf as a person. Where there are deaf people who use signs, there are hearing people that can translate, more or less accurately, those signs. So, the interpreter is no more the accompanist that sustains or substitutes the deaf, but he is a bridge between these two communicative channels and codes. The interpreter becomes a professional figure. In Italy, the service of real interpreting is officially coming with the Law 104 of 1992 on the rights of the handicapped. This law represents a dividing line between the past and the present, because for the first time it is recognized that handicapped people can have rights, and among them an interpreter at the university. Before the Law 104, graduated deaf people all over Italy were less than 10, while today more and more deaf people are graduating in almost all the faculties. A popular thought is that an interpreter for deaf people limits itself to translate only words, speeches, or concepts. It is often the case, but there are some people, interpreters, that are determined not to simply translate words, but they realize that every person, no matter what handicap they have the right to live a normal life, or at least as much as as much normal as possible. For this reason, some ASL American Sign Language interpreters, in particular Amber Galloway Gallego, tried to make listen and understand music to the deaf. The Americans with Disabilities Act is an American law adopted in 1990 that provides for the arenas, theaters, and organizers of concerts are obliged to offer in the events that they organize a service of interpreting for deaf people if requested. Amber Galloway Gallego translated concerts of the most popular modern singers like Adele, the Red Hot Chili Peppers, Lady Gaga, or Drake. She translated more than 400 concerts, and all of them with success. That's what deaf people say. Also, she explained that for years the musical part to communicate visibly for deaf people has been ignored, adopting a generic gesture that reminds a person who plays the violin to indicate that in that moment there was music. Amber Galloway Gallego is one of the first who created a way to translate in gestures the sound of a song. She began thinking of the sign used to indicate a fat person, including to fill the cheeks with air to give an impression of something intense. What appears in the study, and what I would like to stress, is that we must not criticize a person or consider him or her less intelligent just because they have a disability. It is right to protect people who are carriers of these diseases and ensure their rights, secure a job, and not leave them behind because of their difficulties. Everyone deserves an opportunity, and often we all may be surprised at how wonderful these people are and how much potential they have and how much they can help in the society.